Okay guys, this is the third review I'm doing for Marvel Rivals after the technical alpha has concluded. Why 3 reviews? Because, well, I need a little bit more time to digest the game and have a bit more thinking about it after talking to more people, observing the game a little bit more, and just overall collecting my thoughts on how everything went and my response to that. I did a couple more reviews earlier on, one 3 days into the alpha itself, where I essentially had a long Twitter thread outlining my initial thoughts. It was a pretty comprehensive thread, all things considered, but not the best format to do an actual proper review. I did a much longer review on my Twitch stream at the end of the technical alpha, but ended up being like a very long kind of review, an hour and 20 minutes or something like that, not very digestible, and I wanted to be able to summarize my thoughts a little bit clearer on something like this in a video instead. Something that happened recently was I was on probably the biggest Overwatch-based podcast with a bunch of really large content creators. We talked a little bit about Marvel Rivals, people that were extensively playing it. Some of the creators were actually in the creator program as well, and gave our honest analytical thoughts about that, and that sort of allowed me to reanalyze a couple of my thoughts on the game and hear some other perspectives which were really important. So, you know, now putting everything together, I think we're going to be able to talk about this game in a more holistic way, especially now that we've had a little more time to think. If you've seen or heard any of the reviews I've done previously or seen those comments, you probably think I have a bit of a negative outlook on this game, but it's actually not entirely true. I generally think the game is pretty good and has a lot of potential, but with that, there's going to be some concerns as well. And the goal of this review is to be as objective as possible, to give good, honest feedback, to be comprehensive, and to add nuance to the discussion. If you want the game to improve and you want the game to have a good future, you need to be honest about how you talk about these kind of things, and you need to be able to give good feedback that is not prone to too much bias, you know. There's going to be a lot of comparisons to other games like Overwatch. That's inevitable. The game has a lot of features, let's just say it, copied over, ported over, influenced, inspired by games like Overwatch, a game that I have a lot of experience in. You know, 3 years working professionally in Overwatch on the Overwatch League as an analyst commentator. I've also done ALGS, Apex Legends, VCT NA as well for Valorant, high-level competitive Team Fortress 2 player, so safe to say a lot of experience in this genre of game, in this particular area. Many years in this industry, just working in gaming, esports, all that kind of stuff, talking to a lot of other players that are much better than me, some that are going to be worse than me, getting everyone's opinions, their kind of thoughts on this game. I've had, you know, high-level players that actually played in the recent tournament in Marvel Rivals for the alpha come into my chat. I've talked to them as well, had their thoughts, had them check over some of my thoughts to see what they think about that as well, and see where we align and where we maybe misalign. And so I've definitely done my fair research on this subject and to give my accurate thoughts on what I think about this game. Now, obviously, the game released to the public as a closed alpha test, and without wanting to get too deep into what the terminology of alphas mean anymore, it's honestly a little bit difficult because in the gaming industry, as we are in the modern age, these kind of terms are thrown around way too loosely for all types of release stages, for all types of games, to the point where, honestly, it barely means anything anymore. If I was to be extremely cynical, I'd probably say something like this is a marketing play to essentially get people to say, wow, this game looks really good for an alpha, or to essentially prevent themselves from getting too much criticism for the game by defending themselves with a shield of, hey, but it's just an alpha, so, you know, you can't really criticize the game. Unfortunately, I'm not going to be buying that today, and there is plenty to talk about in terms of the good and the bad of what we've seen of the game so far. That is all to say that basically I would expect the game in future iterations, when the beta comes, when the full release comes, to not be fundamentally too different to what we've already seen. Yes, there'll likely be more content. They've already teased the fact that there will certainly be more content. I'm expecting more characters, more maps, but the core of the gameplay will likely persist through to the release and even after the release itself. Final thing to mention before we dive into this review is to say that this game did have a non-disparagement clause in the content creator contract given to creators who are part of the program, to essentially say that they were not allowed to speak negatively about the game whatsoever. That clause has since been rescinded, but I thought it'd be worth mentioning for the sake of clarity and transparency that I was not a part of this content creator program, and as such, all of my thoughts are going to be honest and as objective as possible. Now, obviously, some things are going to be my own personal opinion, but beyond that, I'm going to try and catch any biases I have and to make sure that things are given to you in an objective manner. I'm going to start by talking about some of the things I did enjoy about this game. Despite what I said earlier, the game actually does look pretty good for an alpha, although I would dispute the terminology of calling it an alpha. Again, this game is probably not likely to change too much from now until the beta. But anyway, there were very few bugs. The game was extremely playable. It was very fluid. The gameplay was solid. Generally, I had a lot of fun. I think that's the most important thing. If you just want to play a very fun game, you don't want to think too hard about, you know, potential issues or other concerns, and you just want to sort of dive in and have a bit of fun, screw around, play some games, and not particularly think too hard about anything, then yeah, the game's fantastic. I think it's already in a pretty good state. They've obviously chosen a good time for the game to be revealed to the public in terms of how far deep into the development it is. I'm aware the game is probably several years of development at this stage, but beyond that as well, it's come at a time when, you know, a lot of people are interested in alternative options in the hero shooter genre, I'm sure. So the game visually looks good. I think that's the strongest point about the game, is that visually it is a good art style. I think the art direction needs to be applauded. It's probably the best part about the game. It stayed true to the Marvel universe in terms of the character designs, visually how they look, how they play as well. We'll get more into the gameplay in a second. The cell shading art style really works well for this type of game, in the sense that, you know, obviously all the characters are based on the comic books, you know, partially on the movies as well. I'm sure they'll be designing plenty of skins for all the different looks and all the different versions the characters appear in. But the sort of comic book art style is just great for the actual game itself. And so I think if you're a Marvel fan, you'll probably be quite pleased about how the game looks and how the characters are represented and how they feel, and likely how they play as well. So that's 2 thumbs up from me. Honestly, that was a really good part about the game. And you know, if we're just looking at it visually, I think the visuals as far as graphics goes is pretty stunning so far. As alluded to, there's very few bugs in the game at the moment. Certainly no major bugs that prevent you from playing the game. I didn't experience anything super big or disruptive in my game time, in my playthroughs. No crash to desktop moments. I've heard that some players did experience something like that, you know, particularly around the Doctor Strange portals. I think that's the only like real major kind of quote-unquote bug that people experience, where, you know, that did cause some issues for a lot of people. But beyond that, you know, the polish of the game seems pretty good. There was nothing that would really prevent you from playing the game. And, you know, the games seem to be able to run without too much of a hitch. And so, yeah, that side of the game was very well done. The third person was not really an issue for me. I imagined that the third person was going to be a little bit more of a problem for me than it actually was, but for the type of game that it is, it actually flowed pretty well despite it being in third person. I still think for this type of action game, first person probably works better, but I can understand why they went for the third person. Given the fact that you do have a lot of different types of characters in this type of game, where a lot of them are actually kind of melee heroes as well, those probably feel and visually respond better to a third-person environment than first-person. I think third-person is generally better for melee than first-person, so that stays true. Beyond that as well, again, if I was to be maybe slightly cynical here, I think third-person is probably better for net ease, for them to be able to market and sell skins in the future, as being able to actually see your skin and in real time while you're playing the game, which is something you can realistically only do in third person, is probably important to them on that side of things. One of the more impressive things was actually how many features were already in the game. So you already had, you know, very well functioning UI, extremely good menus. Obviously, a lot of the menu features were kind of ported over from Overwatch, but again, that's going to be a repeated theme throughout this review and throughout the gameplay if you've already played the game or if you've already seen the game. Now, the features that I thought were very impressive, that are kind of rare for this stage of development. Essentially, on day one, we had a replay viewer, in-game tournament system, and a ranked mode. Now, if we're going to get technical here, ranked didn't actually come out until the second day. But that aside, the fact that it was in this test at all, this pre-release test, is extremely impressive. We already had a ranked mode, functioning rank system. People already got the rank up, already was a top 500. There was a leaderboard for that as well. I mean, that's not something you typically get super early in games. Even on full release games, you might not get ranked straight away. Overwatch certainly didn't have ranked straight away. That took a little while to come in. Replay viewer is extremely impressive because there's games to this day, like Valorant, that do not have a replay viewer. At the date of this recording, that game is still, you know, the community really wants a replay viewer. They still haven't released one yet. So several years into development, into full release, some games don't have that feature. So that's a really impressive feature. More impressive than that still is the fact that there's an in-game tournament system, and backed by that is an in-game faction or clan system as well. A lot of games like Overwatch actually are missing these types of features. So in Overwatch, there's been a massive request for things like faction/clans and also in-game tournaments for a very long time. That game's been out for 8 years, and there's none of that to be seen still 8 years to date. So the fact that Marvel Rivals already has that is super, super impressive. I'm obviously going to be very interested in those types of features, but being able to make a clan together, make a team together, and then participate in actual in-game tournaments that are automated. Now, the tournament that actually took place, you'll actually see the footage behind me. If you're wondering what the gameplay was, this is footage from that tournament that took place. Dawn of Legends, it was called. A massive, up to 500 team. I don't exactly know how many teams actually signed up, but up to 500 teams could sign up for this thing. You sign up through the in-game tournament system, creating a faction for yourself, and submitting your team that way. And as far as I'm aware, everything was completely automated. You got to play through your matches. The game chose them for you. It scored everything for you. You didn't have to interact with any admins. You didn't have to interact with anything else other than the tournament UI itself. It created scheduling for you. It showed a bracket for you as well. And you were able to essentially just navigate through that and play through the entire tournament. And as far as I'm aware, talking to people that were actually part of this tournament, they didn't have any real issues with it. It ran pretty smoothly. The only issues that they had told me about was the format was not particularly good as a tournament format, but you know, we don't have to dive deep into tournament operations at this stage. Safe to say they didn't really enjoy the fact that it was single elimination and some of the seeding wasn't particularly fair in their mind, but these are small details that are not super major and are not going to apply to like 99% of the player base who may or may not use this feature or may not want to get into the super competitive side. But the fact that it exists in the first place, I think, is like really, really insane. Like this is super forward thinking. And something that is quite rare in a lot of games. Overall, on the positive side, I think the things that have been done well in this game have been done very well. It was a polished experience, and I didn't have too many issues, and I think that's the most important thing as far as an initial presentation goes. So, yeah, all in all, pretty impressive. But, as with anything, there are some things that I did not like, so we'll go into some of the cons that I had with this game. I think we need to start with the elephant in the room. This is the big one that when I've talked to just about anybody else about the game, everyone agrees on this particular point. Even the people that have given glowing reviews about the game can't even really cope too hard about this point, and that is there is a lot of visual clutter in Marvel Rivals as far as the closed alpha test went. Pretty non-debatable, I think. Basically, unanimous agreement here across the board. You'd have to honestly be coping to disagree with this point. This is a pretty big one for the game so far. You know, even among the best players, among the worst players, among all different skill levels, among people that have played a lot of this genre, among people that especially haven't played much of this genre, there's a lot going on at the same time, all the time, everywhere. That can have some appeal if you're the type of gamer that just wants to have everything happen a lot all the time and maximum chaos on the battlefield at all times. But for a lot of people, I think for most people, the level of uptime in this game is probably greater than basically any other game I played at the multiplayer shooter level. You know, this game has more uptime than Overwatch, and what I mean by uptime is how often and how commonly you are in combat, that you are seeing things on your screen, that you are having your screen cluttered by just about everything. Generally speaking, let's be honest here, there are 12 players on the map. It's a 6v6 game. Everyone has different abilities. You know, everyone's sort of flying around, shooting stuff at you. It's a very spammy game as well, in the sense that some abilities have quite long cooldowns, but other abilities are very spammable, very low cooldown. Large visual effects, a lot of visual effects. Now, individually, if you just play in the training range, I don't think the visual effects seem that bad in a vacuum, but once you get into an actual game, an actual 6v6 game, where everything's happening at the same time and everyone's doing everything at the same time and not even often together, it's a lot. There's just a lot happening, and it doesn't help that there are certain other things that make the visual clutter worse than certain other games. Let's say at Overwatch, that's going to be the main comparison here. You have certain abilities in this game that I think are probably some of the worst offenders, and we'll call them out. It's the group walls and it's the Loki clones. I think those are the two worst offenders by far. The third worst offender after that would probably be the environmental destruction, but I'll get into that a little bit deeper after I talk about these abilities. First, the fact that you can have basically two groups on the battlefield spamming walls at each other, a maximum of 4 walls per group player. Now, I know when you look at the cooldowns, there looks like there's only 3 walls. You can actually place a maximum of 4, despite there looking like you can only place 3. You can place 4. So there's 8 walls in total. If there's 1 grid on each team, you have the Loki clones as well. Both these heroes are very meta, by the way, in the sense that they're very popular heroes. A lot of players I've seen in games of various skill levels are picking these heroes. Loki can create 2 additional clones of himself that you can teleport to. You can have essentially up to 6 Lokis on the battlefield with 8 group walls, falling terrain, all sorts of other abilities coming out of nowhere, a lot of voice lines going off at the same time. It is quite a lot to deal with for your senses, and this is coming from the perspective of someone that is extremely veteran in this type of genre. Now, was it still playable? Yeah, it was still playable, but I think I'd be lying if I said it was like a good experience from that respect. I think there's a lot that can be improved on the visual clarity side. That's one thing that Overwatch certainly improved with the move from 6v6 to 5v5. It's not just the fact that they reduced 2 players from the battlefield, they also improve visual clarity by reducing the amount of visual effects that each hero and each player was putting out of the battlefield as well, so you can more easily see the damage, see what was happening, and be able to clearly identify targets. Because another thing that's a bit of an issue is hero silhouettes are not particularly clear. That's something that needs to be improved as well. In a game like Overwatch, it's very clear who you're fighting against at just about any range. The silhouettes are incredibly unique. You know straight away without an instant of hesitation exactly what you're going up against, and in many cases as well, what state of the game you are in terms of the strength level of that character, you know, based on where they're positioned and other visual cues they give you as well in terms of their power level. In this game, very hard to tell these things at a distance, especially when there's a lot of clones out, when there's a lot of walls out, a lot of heroes that have, you know, they are different when you look at them in a vacuum as far as silhouettes goes, but when they're all mashed up together and they're all, you know, at a particular distance as well, too many heroes just look very similar to the point where it can be quite difficult. You know, you get in situations where you're trying to use an ultimate, let's say the Punisher ultimate, and it can be just difficult to find exactly what you're targeting, especially if everyone's actually on the ground at the same time. You know, among all the things that is happening, a bunch of times you can just find yourself kind of spraying and praying and just unloading damage into the battlefield, hoping you're picking off something important and doing something impactful. Now, I want to clarify right now, before the very predictable skill issue comments start to come in. Is it impossible to play the game in this state? No, you can still play through it. You can still work your way through it and just get through all the clutter and still aim and still shoot and probably still have fun. But we're talking about things that can be improved here. We're talking about things that are issues for players of all various skill ranges. I've talked to players of various skills and they all tend to agree that this is some sort of an issue. And we are comparing this to other games in the same genre that have much less of an issue in this position. So yeah, visual clutter needs to be addressed. It's something that can be improved and probably should be improved. As far as the visual feedback goes, and this is a really ironic point, but there's a lot of visual effects on the battlefield, but because there's so much happening on the battlefield, it can actually oftentimes be difficult to see what is incoming damage towards you. And often when you're actually shooting other players or when you're hitting them with abilities, aside from the fact that you're getting a hit marker, it's visually not particularly impactful in terms of feedback when you're actually hitting another player to see that feedback come through outside of the hit marker itself. And this was something that was actually brought up, you know, on the Group Up podcast when I was talking to the other creators.
One of the biggest things we didn't even mention was like, you can't even tell half the time where the damage is coming from. Like when you get hit, it's like hard to tell, like, where was I shot from? Who is shooting me? What are they shooting me with? And where from? So like, yeah, stuff like that.
Part of the reason why, again, visual feedback wasn't great is because there's too much happening at the same time that it's just too hard to differentiate, you know, what is damage from what is specifically hitting you. I think the health bar placement might be a little bit weird as well. I'll catch my own bias to say here that, you know, having played a lot of Overwatch, I'm more used to looking bottom left to see my health rather than center of my screen. So it's just a little hard to sometimes tell if I was actually low HP or not. But part of that is also due to the fact that there's just a lot of damage in this game. And after talking about visual clutter, we can talk a little bit about the actual gameplay itself. One thing that doesn't really help with the spam of the abilities is just how many abilities there actually are in this game. Now, the important thing to note is that not all the abilities that plan to be added onto the heroes are actually in the game itself yet. And what I mean by that is to essentially say there is a feature in this game called a team-up ability. So if you haven't played yet, essentially certain characters in the game, when they're on the same team with other characters, they have abilities specific to that combination duo. So one of the ones that you'll see commonly in the game, at least as far as the closed alpha test goes, was Punisher plus Rocket Raccoon. And when you have those two players on a team together, the Rocket Raccoon player gets an additional ability by default bound to Z, and it was to give infinite ammo to the Punisher. So he had an extra deployable, and there were a fair number of additional team-up abilities in the game, depending on who you were picking. As far as I'm aware, there will be plenty more team-up abilities in the game because you can have up to 3 per character. So essentially what this means is with the future development of the game and with future content coming through with more heroes being released, you're going to see more heroes being added where more team-ups are going to be added to the game per hero as well. I've actually gone ahead and looked into just how many interactable buttons and things that you can press in this game to do that will do something in the game, and essentially is outlined to this. You have your default buttons Q, E, Shift, and F. This is obviously for PC. Those are your default buttons. Z, X, and C for the team-ups. Mouse 1, Mouse 2 for shooting. And then V by default is your quick melee. So if you actually calculate those together, that's 10 different inputs so far that you can have on a singular hero. Now, not every single hero actually has that many inputs. That's just a maximum number of inputs available once you actually have all team-ups in the game. Currently, though, even without all the team-ups being in the game, you already have, on average, more abilities, more interactable abilities for you to press in the game, more inputs to press in the game than Overwatch. On average per hero, there are more inputs in Marvel Rivals right now. Why is that a problem? It's a problem in a couple of different ways. One, it adds the amount of abilities that are actually in the game, the amount of abilities that you have to track, that you have to remember, that you have to be able to learn and know what they do, know what's coming, know what's incoming. You have to be able to learn all the different types of team-ups that exist in the game, and once the game releases a lot more heroes that are going to have more team-ups, it's going to become very convoluted, incredibly tedious, especially for new players. It's a unfortunate reality that, you know, most of the players in this game are going to find it probably a little difficult to keep up with how many different abilities and how many inputs are in this game. 10 inputs is really, really huge for an action game like this. This is not an MMO game. In an MMO, you can have, you know, 20 keys, you can have a bunch of different abilities, you can have multiple bars, not particularly an issue, a very different type of game. But for something that's meant to be a hero shooter, for something that's meant to be a shooting action game, up to 10 different inputs for an action game is like the highest that really exists for any game in this particular genre, and I just think it's a little too much. And it's not particularly a skill issue thing, because I just think the design is just fundamentally unapproachable for most people. I think most people who actually just want to have fun in this game don't want to have to learn that many abilities per character and then be able to have to learn that on the other team as well, when you're going up against a whole different, you know, an entire different team, and you have to know what their roster is and know what all of their abilities are and all the team ups are. It's a lot in the game. It doesn't help with the visual clarity either, because as mentioned, the game is already pretty spammy as it is. When you have this many things you can throw at your opponents in the game per hero, 12 heroes on the battlefield, up to 10 abilities per hero, think of how much spam that actually is. Think of how many abilities on the battlefield that actually is. It is a ton. It's too many. It's way too much. It's going to cover the entire battlefield and just lots of visual crap. It already is, and we're not even at the potential of just how many abilities there actually will be in the game once things progress further in content. Let's talk about the third biggest offender as far as it comes to visual clutter. It's the destructible environments. Now, this one is maybe a little bit controversial because there are some people that do actually like the destructible environments for different reasons, and there are people like me that do not like them. But the one thing that we can all agree on, even among the people that do actually like the destructible environments, is that some of the destructible environments are just too much. Some of them just take things a little bit too far. Generally speaking, the kind of destructible environments I'm okay with, that I can accept in games like this, is being able to shoot down a wall, create a new pathway, be able to flank through, get a little bit creative with your pathing in the game. I think that's generally fine. Something close to Rainbow Six Siege, where you can create alternative pathways, that's probably healthy. But once you start talking about other things in the game, like shooting down an entire archway, an entire bridge, entire parts of maps, large pieces of maps, places that you can stand on maps, especially destructible high grounds, all that kind of stuff, it becomes a little bit ridiculous. And part of it is a visual clutter side, part of it is a gameplay side. Let's address the visual clutter side first. The visual clutter side, you essentially have a situation where destructible environments also leave rubble. They leave debris on the ground that can affect gameplay. Some people, on a very basic level, if you didn't want to think about it too much, you'd probably think, well, that's probably a good thing, right? Because it sort of changes the game up, keeps things fresh, you know, forces you to adapt a little bit. You may say that for the early novelty, but once you play this game enough, and once you played the same maps over and over again, and once you've done the same Destructibles over and over again, it really doesn't change much of the game at all. And honestly, the only thing it adds is more tedium, more annoyances into the game, and the rubble, it just starts to become something that not only overcomplicates the game, but just makes the game feel worse to play.
I freaking hated the Destructible environment. I get the appeal that's fun and fresh, but it just never felt fun to me. Like, I never was like, oh, that's cool, I get to break a wall. And no, not once. But how many times did it annoy me? Many times, not to mention the visual clutter.
On the visual clutter side, the falling debris doesn't just disappear. It actually retains itself on the map, and it blocks your line of sight. It causes pathing issues. It's just more things that exist on the map that, in my opinion, don't add anything of real value to the gameplay, and all it does is make things more complex, confusing, or difficult to play through. The rubble itself causes, you know, dust particles. There's more visual effects happening at the same time as well. And that's just on the visual end. On the actual gameplay end, I think it has a lot of negative impacts. Now, if you were to look at this at an extremely basic level, you'd think, well, doesn't this improve the game in the sense that maybe it adds a little bit more creativity to the game, or it adds different dimensions to the game? Maybe it makes the game more unique per game. And I would say the novelty that wears off extremely quickly. You might experience that in the first few games you play, but give it a week, give it a little bit of time, play the game for a long period of time, and you'll realize the destructible environments all happen in the exact same ways. It doesn't really change how you shoot it. It always falls in the same places. It always changes the game in the exact same ways. It becomes extremely cookie cutter extremely quickly. Now, I still believe that being able to shoot through walls and be able to create new pathways that way is creative, but when you're talking about giant destructibles just blocking pathways and causing disturbances that don't add gameplay value, that just make the game more annoying to play, that's pretty negative. I think let's talk about this destructible. This is part of the reason why I think this is like the most egregious example of the destructible environment. This opening high ground here that gets destroyed. Look at the coverage. Like right now, the debris covers everything. Everything.
And you to collapse on.
You can't see shit. I think strategically, the destructible environments outside of creating pathways through walls, it actually takes away from the game. If you really want to think about it on a high level, you know, maps and the way that maps are designed, especially when you compare it to other games of the genre, they are supposed to have a certain flow. They are supposed to have a certain design where these are the correct positions to hold. These are high valuable positions. You actually create many objectives on the map that have to do with map control. And these are many objectives that are not necessarily just capping the point or pushing the payload. These are positions of the map that are ideal for you to capture and have control of, that will allow you then to progress onto the main objective, because you can collect superior positioning on the map. Now, we have a situation like we have in Marvel Rivals, where so much of the map is destructible. All of this strategy simply becomes shoot the environment, shoot the high ground, destroy the high ground, and you can just force your opponent to move and go somewhere else and do other things. There's no resource trading involved. There's no real strategic movement involved. You simply shoot the Destructibles, and the Destructibles will remove the defender, or potentially even the attacker's position, will remove their ability to play from valuable positionings. And again, on a rudimentary level, you're like, well, that's good. That's what we want. But on a more strategic level, if you actually care about how this game can play at a better level, or at a more aspirational level, you know, you want to be able to play a game where the map design is deliberate in the way that it flows, in the way that you have to actually move around the map. You want stability in the game where you get to know that certain positions that you can take are valuable and will remain valuable, and for the other team to force you off that position or to fight you for that position, you actually have to have a skirmish where resources are traded, where risks have to be applied, where the other team has to actually make moves, use ultimates, use abilities, trade cooldowns, progress up the map, and take that forcibly from you, instead of being in a situation like this game where actually you can just kind of shoot the high ground. You can actually just shoot this position until it's destroyed, and then everyone's on the ground again, and we play this Groot 8 walls situation with 6 Loki clones again, which is honestly just gross, with especially how much debris there is also on the battlefield. And that doesn't even address the fact that you also in this game, on 2 out of the 3 maps in the closed alpha test, you have respawning destructible environments, which honestly just makes my head hurt in terms of why they even put this in the game. It's honestly just, it boggles the mind, because it ends up being a pretty RNG feature. Now, you could be the guy that says technically not RNG, because I think the respawning Destructibles are actually on a timer. But if we're going to be honest here, no one is realistically going to be expected to count those timers in their head when you consider how many Destructibles are actually on each map. They're all on their own separate timer depending on when they got destroyed. You have a multitude of different abilities to track as well, ultimates to track, positioning to track, all sorts of things to track. There's just no way you're also expected to then track Destructible environment timings on top of that. It's going to happen pretty randomly. You can prove this by watching the top level gameplay, again, of the actual tournament footage in my background. There's exact footage of players being trapped in environments where you're trying to push into a position and a Destructible environment respawns on top of you. Cal walks forward, destroyed building, by the way, as he's trying to go to point. Boom! The room respawns on top of him, and he's trapped. There's no exits. Imagine you're in a team fight like this team fight. The enemy team, let's imagine they have more people alive than this because they have 2 people down, but they are 93%. They're about to fucking camp. Imagine you're an OT and you're about to save your team with an ultimate, and as you rotate to point, the building respawns on top of you or in front of you, and you just get RNG'd, and the game just decides you will lose. I've had in my gameplay where I'm dueling someone in a 1v1, they turn into 2v1 with someone backing them up, I end up having to exit, but the entry I used to get into that fight respawns in my face as I'm trying to exit, and then ends up getting me killed. So it ends up being RNG in the sense that terrain that you believe is available as far as pathing through suddenly then becomes unavailable at an inopportune time that is technically not random, but functionally extremely random. It feels like RNG, and that is not a good thing. Something that can just spawn in front of your face is not a good thing. There should never be respawning Destructible environments. There just shouldn't really be Destructible environments in the first place. I'm okay with the walls falling down. I'm not okay with large sections of the map being Destructible in and of itself. Over on the gameplay side, I think the game caters to more of a hyper-casual audience, which for some people might not be an issue. In fact, you might actually want that in the game. For other people that were hoping for more of a competitive game, this might actually be a problem for you. Let me explain. And the reason why I say it caters more to the casual side is because of how much impact you can have in the game with your abilities, with the things that you can do, versus the amount of skill required to actually do those things in the game. And this is personified in 3 major ways. Number 1 is in the ultimates. Number 2 is in how much damage there is generally in the game. And then number 3 in how much healing there also is in the game. Let's talk about ultimates first. Ultimates charge extremely quickly, way quicker than other games in this particular genre, and they're also far more powerful as well. You essentially have nearly half the hero roster doing some form of giant AoE ultimate. It would be like if half of the hero roster in this game was basically doing the equivalent of a Diva Bomb from Overwatch. That is essentially most of the ultimates in this game. Some of the other ultimates, even if they're not doing the giant AoE Diva Bomb, are still not particularly inspiring in terms of the design. Basically, there is next to no ultimate in this game that I think is a truly skillful ultimate that requires you to have a skillful input to be able to get consistent value. Every single ultimate is designed to give you very easy value at a very quick rate, such that you can show up big time in the kill feed, and you get the dopamine hit, you feel great about pressing the Q button, you get to feel great about having a multi-kill, or basically pressing a single button where you skill check your opponent's ability to dodge said ability with something of their own based on their positioning or based on something that allows them to move, and it's extremely easy to hit. But even other ultimates, especially on the DPS side, where you don't just shoot a giant AoE thing. Let's talk about it. Punisher ultimate. It's very easy to use. You do a ton of damage, some of the highest DPS in the game. Homing rockets, Heller as well. You get huge amounts of safety. You get to have a sky-high 30,000 foot view of the battlefield, essentially, shooting down AoE blasts like an AC-130 from Call of Duty, and you get to see full outlines of your opponents while being protected with an additional 800 HP. Now, if you're good at the game and you're in a high-level lobby, you'll probably just shoot down the Hella ultimate, but in a low-level lobby, that ultimate definitely carries. But even so, there's just very little risk associated with most of these ultimates in the game and how they're used, and very little skill expression in how those ultimates are used as well. One of the best ultimate designs, I think, in a game like Overwatch is something like a Dragon Blade or Sojourn's Overclock, where it is essentially a pure skill ultimate that you need to be able to aim, you need to be able to move properly, use the ability and the toolkits properly, that inherently has a lot of risk involved in terms of whiffing the ultimate and not getting any value at all. You have ultimates like Pulse Bomb on Tracer that are very difficult to hit, that are very difficult to get consistent value out of, versus majority of ultimates in Marvel Rivals where you simply press Q, aim the ability in a certain direction, and if the other players don't get out of the way in time, which for some of the ultimates they happen very quickly, they just get blown up instantly. One of the other egregious ultimates that plays into this hyper-casual design is Loki's ultimate, where he basically transforms into another hero. He copies him and then gets to use their ultimate. Very similar to how Echo plays in Overwatch 2. However, the main difference here is Echo actually has to transform and then build the ultimate from scratch, although at an accelerated rate. Loki, you click a hero on the battlefield, could be your ally, could be the enemy, and you instantly transform and you get the ultimate straight away. You don't have to really work for it. You instantly get another ultimate. You can just spam it into the battlefield straight away. Very easy. Doesn't really incur too much risk at all. On the other side of ultimates, you have to talk about damage and just generally how much damage exists in the game across all the abilities and not just the ultimates. Most things in this game does a lot of damage. The time to kill is extremely quick. If you can actually hit a target and they're not being healed and they're fairly isolated and there's no damage mitigation, they go down very fast. You only need a few hits to get them down. Most of the DPSs do a ton of damage. The supports can even really add a reasonable amount of damage as well, and the tanks, if you get within their range, also add a reasonable amount of damage. So combined with the fact that there are 6 players per team, the damage output is honestly very high. Now, I actually wouldn't have a problem with the amount of damage output in this game if it wasn't for the fact that the healing output is equally, if not even more insane in terms of the pure output available. What I mean by this is you're essentially creating an incredibly unstable and inconsistent TTK time to kill situation in the game when both your damage output and your healing output are both incredibly high at the same time. So you have a game where things can potentially die very, very quickly if they take damage, especially when, you know, the game is a 6v6 and there's a lot of people shooting and using abilities at the same time. But when you have healers on your team, they can actually just pump up healing into a single player or multiple players. The healing is incredibly high. The pocket healing of this game is even more egregious than a game like Overwatch, and it does actually make you appreciate something like the DPS passive in Overwatch, where the healing is reduced when DPS players hit those targets. When you actually look at the raw numbers of the healing, it is wildly high. So the difference between being pocket healed in this game and not being healed at all is incredibly vast. I mean, the delta between the TTK, where your team is actually supporting it and your team is not, is ridiculous. So you have super inconsistent TTK. Somehow I was actually baited into believing this game was going to have low healing, and if that was the case and we had high damage, low healing game, I think I'd be okay with that. I think the actual damage numbers are not bad in a vacuum. It's when you combine it with the healing that you have this time to kill delta situation where, you know, the highs and lows of when you can just like get blown up versus when you become invincible. I mean, the difference between those two states of the game is going to cause problems down the line. And when you think about what the tank issues are in Overwatch, you start to really understand why this could be a problematic thing once you get deeper into the game. All in all, the things that this game does well, it does do pretty well. But unfortunately, you do have to compare this to other games that are in the market right now. And one that everyone's going to compare it to, that they're already comparing it to all over socials, all the discussion around it, it's going to be Overwatch. Whenever someone talks about Marvel Rivals, they're going to bring in Overwatch. They always do, and they currently still are. The fact of the matter is, there's a lot of things that I think this game has the potential to do better than Overwatch. There's also a lot of things that this game is doing that is essentially going to be following the exact same pathway that Overwatch 1 followed in all of its highs and lows. Right now, I think Marvel Rivals has a lot of novelty attached to it in the sense that it's a new game. A lot of people are going to give it a bit of slack. They're not going to give as much criticism. They're probably not going to go as in-depth as me in terms of the criticism. They're going to say, it's just an alpha. It's fine. Things will change. Things certainly can change. And I hope things certainly do change, which is part of the reason why I'm even doing this review. But there are many things I've noticed which are very concerning, and if you want this to be a game that really competes with Overwatch, especially in the long term, and you want this to have a good future ahead of it, you need to consider the issues that will be coming ahead of it. And it's not difficult to look at what kind of issues this game has ahead of it, because all you have to do is look at the pathway that Overwatch 1 took, and you'll be able to easily predict all of the future speed bumps and pitfalls. Some of those are extremely obvious in the sense of how long can we continue playing this game as a open queue 6v6 game, Now, without getting into a 6v6 versus 5v5 debate, one thing that's very, very clear, regardless of which side of that fence you sit, is that the more players there are on the battlefield, the more things are going to be happening on the battlefield. That is visual clutter, that is complexity added to the game, that is potential match queue times as well. Open queue right now means that you can get really quick games. I didn't really have any issues finding games, even in the closed alpha tests, even despite, you know, the lack of players in that particular test. In the future, you're going to end up in a situation where, similar to Overwatch, most of the players are going to be on DPS. This is something that I already experienced in a large majority of my games, and the large majority of games that I saw from other people playing as well. Most of the games being played are dominated by people that want to lock in DPS. Most people are unfortunately not going to want to play tank or support. So you're going to get incredibly imbalanced games where players are not going to be on the ideal roles. As mentioned already, healing is very important and very high in this game. So if you don't have enough supports, if you don't at least have 2 supports in the game, you're probably not going to get enough healing output. If you don't at least have 1 tank in this game, you might not have the damage mitigation to walk through without just eating crap in every single fight. So you need probably to have a balanced team composition. Role queue is going to solve that issue, and role queue is going to end up being another big debate for this game, whether the game should have it or not, because there are role queue believers, there are role queue haters. But let me tell you, once the novelty wears off and the longer you play this game and the more imbalanced games you get, you're probably going to start leaning towards wanting to have a role queue because you want there to be more balanced games that actually have people on the correct roles instead of rolling the RNG dice, praying and hoping you don't lose at the hero select screen. Let's talk about people playing this game competitively and formulating metas and strategies and essentially dictating how the game ends up being played. And this ties into balance of the game as well, because this type of genre of game is going to attract all of those things. If you think that this is an Overwatch specific problem, it's not. This is just how hero shooters work. This is how this genre works. In some cases, this can even be how MOBAs work as well. This is going to end up being a game where, as you can already see from the tournament footage, high-level metas are going to be formed. If you want to win in this game, which everyone does because it is a PvP game, and in a PvP game, you're going to have people that just want to play to be able to win. And the path of least resistance to take to winning is to play the best heroes you can, play the most overpowered heroes you can, and formulate the best team compositions you can in a situation where essentially a meta gets defined. A meta will be defined whether you like it or not. You can try and run from it. It's going to catch you. Balance is also going to be a huge issue in this game. Just like in Overwatch, you're going to have people maining certain heroes. There's going to be favoritism towards a lot of different heroes as well. Things will be overpowered. Things already are overpowered in the closed alpha test. Now, I didn't talk about balance previously in the review because as far as an alpha goes, as far as this early test goes, talking about balance this early is probably not a worthwhile topic, but looking into the future of the game in terms of where the balance could be and what the pathway to balance will be, I can tell you that NetEase is going to struggle with the balance of this game because you have a ton of unique characters that all do different things, and then on top of that, you also have team up abilities as well. That also impacts balance. How good these team up abilities are is going to be incredibly different across the board. It already is right now in the alpha test, where there's some team up abilities that do very little and other team up abilities that really change the game. I'm looking at you, Punisher, Rocket Raccoon. The more of these abilities that exist in the game and the more heroes that exist in the game, the more difficult the challenge of balancing the game will be. There are going to be strong heroes, there are going to be weak heroes, and that is going to mire the entire existence of the game for the entire lifetime of the game, as it does to every single game in this genre. Buckle up, because you're going to experience times when this game is incredibly imbalanced and not particularly fun because of it. And finally, because I didn't forget and I wanted to save the best for last, we're going to talk about the monetization of this game. Now, obviously, in the alpha, we only got a preview of the monetization. Everything was for free, so we don't know the exact specific details of what things will cost. What we are aware of is that there is a battle pass in the game already. There already is a store. There already is a hero gallery with owned and unowned checkboxes, basically alluding to the fact that there will be heroes behind a paywall. There's already a currency in the game. I expect there'll be plenty more different currencies introduced to the game over the course of time. There are obviously skins already in the game. Right now in the alpha, you are able to purchase those skins for free. In the future, I expect that the majority of skins will not be free. You're going to have to purchase them with premium currency. We don't know if the currency in the game right now will remain as free currency or not, but even if there is a free currency, there definitely will also be a premium currency, potentially multiple premium currencies. If you're coping right now and you don't think that these are things that are likely to come to this game, I implore you to look at the history games made by NetEase and their current portfolio, and you'll notice they've actually released 2 prior Marvel games to this. both with heavy monetization, both for mobile. NetEase is primarily a developer that focuses on mobile games, and mobile games have a history of having the worst possible microtransactions and monetization in all of gaming. To end, I'm going to show you some footage from their previous Marvel game, Marvel Super War. It was a mobile MOBA game similar to League of Legends. In fact, so similar, it actually just looks like League of Legends with a bit of a Marvel skin on it. And you can decide for yourself whether you like this type of monetization or not. But based on the gameplay footage, you can already see in-game store, multiple currencies, including premium currencies, gacha mechanics as well, for skins and cosmetics, all different types of potential FOMO mechanics into the game, daily quests, battle passes, all things you'd expect in a free-to-play microtransaction game. So if this was a problem for you in Overwatch 2, well, I'd love to hear what you think about this coming for Marvel Rivals in the future. Also, at the time of this recording, NetEase has announced that Marvel Super War is going to be shut down in June. Does that mean Marvel Rivals will necessarily go down the same pathway? Not exactly, but it does give you something to think about. And look, maybe I could be wrong, and Marvel Rivals really is different. This game ends up being the exception that disproves the rule. And honestly, for the sake of all the people playing, I hope that's actually the case. But if you don't believe me, all you have to do is take a look at the company's track record and see the history for yourself. Finally, I'll say that it's a good thing that the game is here. It's important that there are multiple games of this genre in the market that can challenge each other. You know, whether you're a fan of Overwatch, or whether you really like Marvel Rivals, whether you're a Paladins player or whatever. And, you know, we have upcoming games like Deadlock from Valve as well, but we need these kind of games to exist in the genre so that no one gets stagnant, no one has a monopoly, and no one can just sort of ride on their laurels. You need games to push the envelope a little bit and force everyone else to change up and improve, and that will improve the quality of all these games. So I'm glad Marvel Rivals is here. I'll certainly be playing a lot more of this game, you know, in the future phases when the beta comes out, when the full release comes out. As long as the game remains fun and interesting for me, I think I'll continue playing it. I'll probably play it alongside other games I'm already playing in the same genre. I'll probably play other games that come out in the same genre or even elsewhere. So it's all good for me. Either way we go through it. Overall, though, reasonably good release so far. Good alpha test. Mostly positive things to say about the game. I know it seemed probably a lot of negativity in most of the criticism. But remember, the whole point of this review was to give good, honest, and comprehensive feedback that was going to be fairly objective on issues that I see ahead, issues that I see now. And you have to be honest about these things. You know, I think it's a waste of time to do anything like this, to give any commentary like this where you're going to hold back or you're just going to end up giving 100% glowing reviews. You know, you need to embrace what the good things are with what some of the bad things might be, and then hopefully things look good towards the end. So you need to be able to highlight where the weaknesses are if you want to improve on the weaknesses. That's something I hope that this game is able to do in the future. So if you liked this video, if you enjoyed the review, give me a thumbs up, a like, comment any questions you have below, and I will answer them. And if you want to follow more of my content, watch my streams, or check out some of my other socials, links are down below. And I'll see you in the next one.